I thought I had my whole life figured out, a loving wife, a future full of dreams, until everything fell apart. But sometimes, the family you build from the wreckage is even stronger than the one you lost. Since I was a kid, I had always dreamed of having a family, a loving and supportive wife, wonderful children, and a life filled with happiness. I thought I was on the verge of making that dream a reality. But just when everything seemed perfect, it all fell apart. Out of nowhere, my wife decided she needed more time before starting a family. Jim De, a baseball analyst for the Chicago Cubs, never fails to keep me entertained. That Saturday afternoon, I was watching my favorite team take on the Cincinnati Reds on Marquee Sports. De, a former star with the Houston Astros, seemed a little distracted from the game at Wrigley Field. I couldn't help but notice a cute kid in the stands, one of those little moments that always caught his attention. I, like many others, waited for the moment when he would acknowledge the young fan. The excitement peaked as the Cubs took a 7-2 lead in the fifth inning, forcing the Reds to switch pitchers. Just then, my wife of 6 years walked into the room, carrying a beer for me and a glass of wine for herself. For a brief moment, I turned my attention away from the game, because honestly, seeing my wife in tight denim shorts and a snug top was far more captivating. "Enjoying your childhood memories, huh?" she teased, glancing at the big screen. "Yeah," I admitted with a grin, "but nothing beats spending quality time with my beautiful wife." She blushed at my words and settled beside me on the couch. As she adjusted herself, she giggled. "You guys are so predictable," she teased, playfully puffing out her chest and shrugging. We sat in comfortable silence, watching as the Cubs scored 2 more runs. Then, during the commercial break, Vivian decided to strike up a conversation. She excitedly suggested that we take a trip to Chicago next weekend to start preparing for the next chapter of our lives, parenthood. She even joked that I could catch a Cubs game while she went shopping or did something else. Catching the hint, I shot her a playful glance. "Are you sure you don't want to come to the game with me?" I asked. We had already planned a visit to a local diner and the Shed Aquarium earlier that day, so I wondered if she'd want to join me in the evening. There was a pause before she responded, and I noticed a slight shiver run through her body. "Well," she finally said, "for you there's the Cubs game against the St. Louis Cardinals. You'll have amazing seats right behind the Cubs dugout at third base, with all the food and drinks you could want." She smiled, then casually added, "As for me, I plan on having dinner, then drinking and dancing." Her words hung in the air, and though I smiled, something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. "I'll be at one of the high-class clubs in the city," she said casually, swirling her wine glass as if this conversation meant nothing. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. "I just don't understand, Vivian. You say you want a family, but you don't seem to care about what that means. What about the big moments, the first words, the first steps? Shouldn't that mean something?" My voice was edged with something dangerously close to pleading. She sighed, brushing off my concern like it was a passing inconvenience. "We've been together for 8 years, Q. Have I ever given you a reason to doubt my love or loyalty?" "No," I admitted, but something still didn't feel right. "Then why is this such a big deal?" she pressed. "I just want something for myself. A little bonus. A weekend romance. Not love, just desire. A day and a half, that's all. And after that, we'll forget about birth control and it'll just be you and me. Forever." I stared at her, searching her face for any hint of hesitation, any sign that she was testing me, playing some kind of cruel joke. But all I found was certainty. Cold, unwavering certainty. Disappointed, I shook my head, grabbed my keys and phone, and walked out of the room without looking back. I knew what she was suggesting. She wanted me to be the patient, understanding husband, the one who would turn a blind eye for a momentary indulgence and then return, more devoted than ever. Instead of heading to the Cubs game as she had so subtly implied, I got into my car and turned on the radio. Pat Hughes' familiar voice filled the silence, narrating every play with the same passion he always did. The Cubs pulled off another victory, but I barely registered it. My mind was elsewhere, stuck in an endless loop of questions I wasn't ready to answer. I had no real plan. All I knew was that I needed to be away from Vivian. A part of me wished I could just go back, pretend like none of this had happened. But I couldn't. The weight of her words sat heavy on my chest, suffocating any hope I had left. I thought back to when I first met her. It was at the bank, of all places. She was the cashier, and I found myself drawn to her warmth, the way she smiled so easily. Over the next couple of weeks, I always made sure to stand in her line, even if it meant waiting longer. She must have noticed because she'd started giving me these knowing glances, her cheeks tinged with the softest blush. That spark, that unspoken connection, We had something real once. At least I thought we did. My name is Quincy, but most people, including Vivian, call me Q. It's a family tradition. Every firstborn son for 4 generations has carried the name. My uncle was the last Quincy before me, and after his passing, my parents held on to that legacy with pride. But Vivian's parents? They never really cared much for the tradition. Maybe that should have been my first clue that she never saw things the way I did. 2 weeks before our planned trip, one that was supposed to be about relaxing, reflecting on my career, and sorting out my finances, I packed my bags. 2 suitcases, neatly tucked into the trunk of my car at midnight. I called my younger brother Bill, who lived an hour away, and asked if I could stay with him for a while. He didn't ask questions, just told me I was welcome anytime. And so I left, not knowing where Vivian was or who she was with. But deep down I already knew. She wouldn't fight for me. She wouldn't chase after me or beg me to stay. She would just assume I'd come back when I was ready. That thought haunted me as I drove into the night, unsure of where this road would take me next. I wondered if Vivian would keep calling. After a string of increasingly desperate voicemails, I got a message at 10 p.m. This one was different. Instead of pleading, it was a cold reminder that she had no way of getting home, despite the fact that I was the one who had driven us there in the first place. The next voicemail? Pure rage. Accusations, threats, frustration spilling through the speaker. But after that came another, softer in tone. Now she was pleading again, trying to extend her stay at the hotel. Apparently, she couldn't because her credit cards had been canceled. I listened to all of it in silence, taking a sip of my drink as Sharon, my sister-in-law, smirked over the rim of her margarita. "This really is an amazing margarita," she mused before glancing at me. Her phone buzzed and she answered with an exaggerated sigh. I could tell it was Vivian. Sharon made a face as she listened, occasionally replying with vague comments, but she didn't sound particularly sympathetic. After a few minutes she said, "Good luck, Viv," and hung up. Turning to me, she arched an eyebrow. "I gave you a head start, Q. You owe me one." I scoffed, shaking my head. "You're not seriously buying into whatever she just told you." "No, I don't believe her," Sharon admitted. "I'm just telling you what she said." Then she narrowed her eyes. "But, you did just up and leave after an argument. Didn't even give her a chance to explain. That was a little cold, don't you think?" I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. I wasn't going to stand there and justify myself. Not to Sharon, not to anyone. A few days later, I started a new job in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Half an hour after walking into my new office, I officially became Oliver Navarro, a man leaving behind old ties to Indiana and Bishop Enterprises. The company provided me with a modest 2-room apartment, a fresh start, a place where Vivian couldn't track my calls, my bills, or my whereabouts. To make sure of that, I bought a new phone and switched providers. Only a handful of trusted people had my number: my parents, my brother, Bill. "She still hasn't filed for divorce," Bill informed me during one of our calls. That caught me off guard. "She hasn't?" "Nope," he replied. I wasn't sure why that surprised me. Maybe a part of me expected her to move on the second I was out of sight. And yet, for some reason, she hadn't. Over the next year, my career in Santa Fe took off. I wasn't exactly looking for a social life, and to be honest, I didn't mind the solitude. Occasionally, I'd meet up with colleagues after work, but I kept my personal life minimal, practically non-existent. It wasn't until about a year and a half later that I finally agreed to go on a date. That night, I stopped at a bar after work, where a group of factory workers had just finished their shift. They were all dressed in jeans and work shirts, their energy still buzzing from the long day. One woman stood out as she walked toward me, her shirt slightly unbuttoned, her confidence impossible to ignore. Her smile was wide, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "What's for dinner tonight, Mr. Fancy Dresser?" she teased, tilting her head. I smirked. "Tennessee whiskey, dear. You like it?" She grinned. "Love it." Her name was Angel, and that night we talked, we danced, and we drank like nothing else in the world mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I knew deep down that this was how things were meant to unfold. But in that moment, all I could think about was leaving as soon as possible. Besides, there was still the challenge of figuring out how to communicate with her in a way that truly mattered. Angel and I started slow, just the two of us, taking long walks, getting to know each other beyond the surface. As time passed, she gradually introduced her daughter, Eleanor, into our little adventures. At first, Eleanor kept her distance, hesitant and unsure. But the moment I knelt down to her level and made an effort to truly connect, something shifted. I had read about this approach somewhere, and whoever had suggested it was onto something. One evening, during a casual conversation, Angel mentioned someone named Bobby. Not Bobby as in Robert, she clarified, seeing my confused expression. I raised an eyebrow. Oh. Yeah, Bobby is a lesbian. And I'm bisexual, she said, hesitating slightly as if searching my face for a reaction. Then, as if suddenly realizing something, she furrowed her brows. Wait. Haven't I told you this before? I shook my head, caught off guard. Angel looked down, fidgeting with her hands. Are you sure we haven't talked about this? I think I'd remember, I said, trying to keep my tone light. She finally met my gaze. Does that bother you, Olive? I took a moment before answering. Honestly, I've never really thought about it before. I've known bisexual people, but I guess I've never been in a relationship where it was relevant. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though she still seemed unsure. You know, I added, pretending to be serious, I think the real question is, who do you think Eleanor likes better? Angel's lips curled into a smile. Oh, that's easy, you of course. I laughed, though part of me knew she wasn't wrong. Over time, Eleanor had started to see me as a constant in her life. Eventually, I even got permission to pick her up when Angel was running late at work. I installed a child car seat in my Mustang, a small yet symbolic gesture that made it clear I was in this for the long haul. Months later, Bobby Clarkson's name popped up on my phone. I hesitated before answering. Angel hadn't mentioned anything, and something about the unexpected call made me uneasy. What followed was a conversation I never could have prepared for. Angel was gone. I don't remember exactly how I got through that phone call, but I do remember the sinking feeling that settled in my chest, the overwhelming realization that everything had just changed. Bobby and I met up later that evening, neither of us ready to process the loss but knowing we had to. The first priority was Eleanor. We had to figure out what came next, how to keep her safe, how to protect the little girl Angel had left behind. As we pieced together fragments of Angel's life, we came to a heartbreaking truth. She had no living relatives. No safety net. No one but us. So, without much of a plan, Bobby and I stepped into the roles we were never meant to play. We stocked up on cans of tuna for sandwiches, found a pack of juice and chips, and did our best to make sure Eleanor had what she needed, even as we struggled to wrap our heads around what had happened. We'll have to work something out, Bobby murmured, staring at the small child who had fallen asleep in my arms. Figure out some kind of arrangement. Maybe a caregiver through the state, plus kindergarten support. I'll do whatever it takes, I said without hesitation. Bobby let out a tired laugh. You do realize neither of us has any idea what we're doing, right? Yeah, I admitted. She smirked. You know what they say, the blind leading the blind. That was the first time I laughed that night, the tension in the room finally breaking just a little. Actually, I corrected, smiling, it's the blind leading the blind. I corrected her with a smile. But your version is definitely funnier. Then, extending my hand, I added, by the way, I'm Oliver now. It's nice to officially meet you, Bobby. She shook my hand, giving me a small nod before sitting on the couch across from me. She crossed her legs casually, the way women do effortlessly, something I'd always found tricky to pull off. Yes. I replied, dragging out the word as I sensed she was about to say something important. Bobby took a breath, then said, Oliver, how would you feel about moving into a bigger apartment? I could move in permanently. I raised an eyebrow. It would be more practical, she continued. We could take care of Eleanor together. I mean, I'm already really attached to her. I exhaled, letting the weight of her words settle. I knew she was right. Raising Eleanor together made sense. And truth be told, I didn't want to do it alone. It's funny how words, simple as they are, can hit so deep. The first time Eleanor called me Dad, my heart nearly burst. And when she called Bobby Mom, I saw something shift in her, something raw and unguarded. One evening, I was helping Eleanor tie her shoelaces when she looked up at me and said, Thanks, Dad. A lump immediately formed in my throat. I barely managed a nod before retreating to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to pull myself together. A few minutes later, I walked out, my eyes still wet, but a smile on my face. Bobby smirked and playfully patted my shoulder. You okay there, tough guy? Before I could answer, the front door swung open. Vivian. She stood in the doorway, wide-eyed, as if she was on the verge of collapsing. I motioned toward the couch. Relax, Viv, I said evenly. Bobby and I may not be married, but Eleanor is still our daughter. Vivian let out a slow sigh of relief. Well, that's a little encouraging. We can work with that. I narrowed my eyes. What do you mean? And more importantly, why did you come back after all this time? Aren't we already divorced? I had assumed, no, expected, that our marriage had been legally dissolved. But to my shock, Vivian had never filed. The realization sent a strange wave of emotions through me. Frustration, confusion, and something I couldn't quite place. Vivian gave me a knowing look, her gaze drifting over the room. Her eyes briefly lingered on Bobby and Eleanor before she spoke again. "You seem to have recovered quickly," she remarked, her tone flat, as if nothing had changed. I clenched my jaw. She continued, as if savoring the moment. "Your boss at Bishop Enterprises covered for you perfectly. Even when you changed offices and started using your middle name, he kept telling my father's investigators that Q no longer worked there." My heart pounded. "Dad had to get a court order to access Bishop's records," she added with a smirk. "And that's when he realized your middle name was Oliver." I swallowed hard, my fists tightening. She tilted her head. "After that, all I had to do was cut off your financial support." I stared at her, barely breathing. So this was never about love. Never about closure. Vivian had come back because she wanted control. And I wasn't about to give it to her. "I hope I'm not asking too much of your selfishness," Vivian said, her voice measured, her expression unreadable. I sighed. "I'll try my best, Q. But that's all I can guarantee. Maybe with time." Before I could finish, she stood up from the couch, gave me one last faint smile, and walked out of the apartment. Out of my life. Maybe for good. Bobby sat beside me on the couch, sending Eleanor upstairs to play. Our knees touched, and when I looked at her, I saw the same look I'd seen before, uncertainty mixed with something deeper. "Did you really mean what you just said to your wife?" she asked. I met her gaze. "That we're a family?" She nodded, still on edge. "We've been talking about this for almost a year," I reminded her. That evening, the three of us sat together, flipping through old photos of Angel, Eleanor's biological mother. We shed tears, each lost in our own emotions, while explaining to Eleanor how Angel was connected to Bobby and me. It was a conversation filled with heavy truths. We talked about Angel's bisexuality, Bobby's lesbianism, and most importantly, our decision not to hand Eleanor over to the state. "We may not be blood relatives," Bobby said, looking at Eleanor, "but we are connected by love." Eleanor sat quietly, absorbing everything, her small brow furrowed in thought. As time passed, our life together settled into a rhythm. Bobby, despite her undeniable charm, never lacked attention from both men and women. But she was always careful. During our outings, she'd dance with friends, but when unfamiliar men approached her, she always politely declined. One night, however, things took a turn. After returning to our table from a dance with our friend John, a younger man approached her, clearly offended by her earlier rejection. "Come on, honey," he insisted, grabbing her wrist. "I'm better than the guy you just danced with. Or the one you're sitting with." Before I could react, Bobby effortlessly twisted her arm free, her sharp glare cutting through him like a blade. I made a mental note. Next time my dad came to visit, he should teach Eleanor that move. I liked his approach. Years passed, and eventually, we moved into a 5-bedroom house, completely renovated to fit our growing needs. 2 of the bedrooms had private bathrooms, and the family room had a built-in snack area, quickly turning our home into a favorite gathering spot for Eleanor and her friends. Without hesitation, Bobby and I stepped into the role of surrogate parents for several teenagers, and honestly, we both loved it. Then there was Stephanie. The first time I noticed it, the light in Bobby's eyes when Stephanie was around, I couldn't help but smile. It was the same happiness I had once felt, the kind that made your heart race without you even realizing it. And yet, a small, unfamiliar twinge of envy settled in my chest. It took Stephanie a while to get used to how close Bobby and I were. At first, she seemed wary, unsure of our dynamic. But over time, she adjusted, understanding what we had was something rare, something built on years of shared responsibilities, late-night talks, and the unshakable bond of raising a child together. Bobby and I were more than just friends. We were partners in the most unconventional yet deeply meaningful way. And no label could ever change that. "But you're right," I added with a chuckle. After an hour-long discussion about family dynamics, Stephanie began to truly understand Bobby's role in Eleanor's life. By the time we parted ways that night, she gave me a small smile and said, "All right, accept me into your ranks. It will be an honor to be part of this family." 6 months later, Bobby and Stephanie got married. Having lost my father many years ago, I had the honor of escorting Bobby down the aisle. It was a moment I never expected to have, but as I walked beside her, I felt nothing but pride. Among her bridesmaids was Eleanor, who beamed with happiness, knowing her family was growing in a way that only made sense to us. Not long after the wedding, life settled into a new rhythm. But one Friday night, Bobby uttered a phrase that instantly made me wary, We need to talk. Few words strike fear into a man's heart like those. But in this case I wasn't afraid, just confused. Eleanor was out with friends and Bobby led me into the formal living room, a space we usually reserved for guests. Stephanie was already there, looking noticeably nervous. As soon as I stepped inside, she handed me a glass filled with Angel's Envy rye and gestured for me to take a seat in one of the plush armchairs. Then Bobby took a deep breath. "We've decided that we want to have a baby," she said, her voice steady. "And we were wondering if you'd like to help us with that." Her words hung in the air. It took me a moment to process what I had just been asked. And then, slowly, a grin spread across my face, the biggest smile I think I've ever had. "This might be the happiest moment of my life," I exclaimed. Laughter filled the room as both women jumped up and down excitedly, like kids who had just found out they were going to Disney World. When the excitement finally settled, I asked, "Why did you choose me?" Stephanie's expression softened. "Because you're already family. And because no one else could possibly love this child the way you would." The weight of her words hit me hard. I thought about how this child, our child, would grow up with two incredible mothers, a devoted father and an older sister who would fiercely love and protect them. The thought overwhelmed me in the best way possible. Before Eleanor left for college, we sat together and told her the news. Tears welled in my eyes as I tried to put my emotions into words. "I love you all so much," I choked out, my voice breaking. Later that night, over dinner, Eleanor practically bounced in her seat with excitement. Jumping up, she threw her arms around Bobby and Stephanie. "I can't believe I'm going to be a big sister. How incredible is that?" she beamed. 2 months later, Bobby, Eleanor, and I sat together, eagerly waiting for Stephanie to come out of the bedroom, pregnancy test in hand. Life had a funny way of surprising me. Though some people didn't always understand our family dynamic, we never let their opinions get in the way. Some adults whispered, gossiping about our unconventional setup, but they rarely challenged Bobby. Her quick wit and unwavering defense of her family made sure of that. Eleanor, on the other hand, thrived. She placed second in her class and was chosen to deliver the graduation speech. Despite my ability to talk my way through any situation, nothing could have made me prouder than seeing my daughter, our daughter, stand on that stage speaking with confidence about the life we had built together. When I offered to help her, she simply smiled and said, "You've already done enough. I don't need any more assistance." She meant it sincerely, but there was something final about her tone. Before we left, we took some time to enjoy a few tourist attractions together, a way to savor those last moments before saying goodbye to Eleanor. As we lined up for our final hugs, I found myself at the end of the line. That's when I realized it wasn't by chance, she had arranged it that way. When it was finally my turn, Eleanor wrapped her arms around me tightly. "Dad, please promise me that you'll make more of an effort to find a good partner," she whispered. I opened my mouth to protest, but before I could, she added in a softer voice, "I know finding someone wasn't a priority for you while I was home. But now that I'm gone, Mom has found happiness and you deserve it too." I hesitated, feeling a familiar weight settle in my chest. I had spent so much of my life as a father, protector, and provider. Romance had been the last thing on my mind. But Eleanor's words stuck with me. Even though I was now in my 50s, I took pride in staying active. I hit the gym 3 times a week and kept myself in good shape. I had built a fulfilling life, but maybe she was right. Maybe there was still room for something more. The thought lingered as I attended Eleanor's wedding. It was a beautiful day, one I wouldn't trade for anything. I made sure to engage with guests, visit every table, enjoy the food and drinks, and even dance with a few women throughout the night. Then, out of nowhere, an energetic woman with silver-purple hair grabbed my arm and dragged me onto the dance floor. She had an infectious energy, the kind that made it impossible to refuse. After a few dances, I led her back to our table and began introducing her to my friends. Thankfully, my 2 best friends decided to give her some time before bombarding her with their endless questions. "I'll get you another drink," I offered with a smile before stepping away to the bar. As I waited, Jack's mother, Mara, approached me. She glanced over at the woman, who was now sitting with Bobby and Stephanie, and gave me an approving nod. "She seems a little fiery," Mara mused, "but I've heard the 3 of you take great care of each other." I chuckled. That's one way to put it. Over time, our unconventional family expanded in ways I never imagined. When our first granddaughter, Jack, was born, her parents, Mara and Tom, admitted that they felt a little jealous of how often we visited. To fix that, we invited them to spend Christmas with us so that all 6 grandparents, along with Robert, could celebrate the holidays together. Mara accepted the invitation without hesitation, excited at the chance to reunite with her best friend, Deb, whom she hadn't seen since Deb and I had moved to Santa Fe. Tom, however, needed a little more convincing. The next day, Deb pulled me aside looking stunned. "I think they were serious," she confessed. I met her gaze, my expression calm. "Of course they were serious," I replied. "We've always supported each other. That's never going to change." And in that moment I realized how much my life had evolved. What had started as loss and uncertainty had transformed into something extraordinary, something built on love, friendship, and an unbreakable bond that only grew stronger with time. "I never want to hurt you," she had once told me. "But if it ever happens, I won't linger, I'll disappear in an instant." She called it self-preservation. Deb eventually convinced Mara and Tom that Santa Fe was the perfect place to retire, and 8 years later they did just that. It happened sooner than they originally planned, but when the house next door to ours became available, the decision was easy. Tom was the last to come around, but in the end he admitted that being close to family, especially the grandchildren, was worth it. One evening, as I sat on the back porch with a glass of whiskey in hand, my granddaughter climbed onto my lap, curling up against me. Her slender frame felt warm, her dark red hair and bright blue eyes a striking reminder of her late grandmother. I had never told her that before. Never told her how much she looked like the woman we both missed. She looked up at me, studying my face. "What are you thinking about, Grand?" she asked, using the nickname she had come up with for me when she was little. I smiled, taking a slow sip of my drink. "Just thinking about my life, and how lucky I am." She tilted her head. "How?" I exhaled, searching for the right words that a 9-year-old could understand. "Well, honey," I began, swirling the amber liquid in my glass, "I've been through a lot of situations in life where, at first, everything seemed to be falling apart." Her little brow furrowed in curiosity, waiting for me to continue. "But somehow things always came together in ways I never expected." I looked down at my granddaughter, her bright blue eyes filled with curiosity, waiting for me to explain. "You see, sweetheart," I continued, "there were times when I thought I had lost everything. Times when life didn't go the way I planned. But somehow, the universe always had a way of giving me exactly what I needed, even if it wasn't what I expected." She nodded slowly, absorbing my words in the thoughtful way only a child could. "So, even when bad things happen, something good can come from it?" I smiled, brushing a stray strand of red hair from her face. "Exactly." She sat quietly for a moment, then grinned. "Well, if the universe was going to give you a family, I think it did a pretty great job." I chuckled, wrapping an arm around her. "I'd have to agree with you on that." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over our home, I took a deep breath, letting the moment settle deep into my heart. Life had taken so many unexpected turns, heartbreak, loss, change. But in the end, I had been given a life filled with love, family, and second chances. I had no regrets. Looking out at my home, my family, and the life we had built together, I realized something simple but profound. I had found my way, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. The end.